Hello and welcome to Spotlight North Carolina Cooperative Extension. I'm your host, Rebecca Benton. North Carolina Cooperative Extension is located in all 100 counties, including the Koala boundaries. We are comprised of two land-grant universities, NC State University and NC State University. We pride ourselves on bringing groundbreaking research to you, the citizens of this show. So today I have with me Howard Wallace. Howard, welcome to the show.
I'm so glad to be back, Rebecca. Thank you for having me once again.
So I hear we're going to talk about some weed identification.
We are. It is, as we're filming this right now, you know, it's the end of February. We're starting to go into spring, and a lot of our winter weeds are starting to get really aggressive. We're getting a lot of phone calls at the office right now about what to do about some of our most common winter weeds. So I wanted to bring a couple for folks to kind of show them so that we could get them identified properly and learn how to manage them out of their home lawns. So I'm going to start with you, Rebecca, by asking you a question. Do you know what a weed is?
I do not, but let me tell you this.
Okay.
I've always said I wouldn't have a lawn if it wasn't for weeds.
Right. Right, and they are very aggressive this time of year. Winter weeds typically like mild days, cooler nights. As the temperatures rise at night, especially, you start to see our population of winter weeds go into decline. Some of our winter weeds are actually annuals, meaning that they come back from seed every year. Some are perennials, which we'll look at here in a second, that come back perennially every single year, and if they're not managed out, they'll just continue to stay there. But to get back again to my question for you, do you have an idea of what the definition of a weed is?
I do not.
A weed is just a plant out of place. Some plants serve a purpose and can be ornamental, but when they show up somewhere they're not supposed to be growing, they are technically considered a weed. For example, morning glory vine. Morning glory vine shows up in our cornfields, and it is especially difficult when it shows up in our sweet potato fields because it's in the family with sweet potatoes. So to the farmer, morning glory is going to be considered a weed. It is out of place in their field. However, you can buy ornamental morning glory and place it, along a trellis or along the edge of a fence, or people like to plant them underneath their mailbox post and have them grow up the mailbox post. And to some consumers, morning glory is actually, a nice ornamental plant. So that's what really delineates the difference between what we consider to be a plant and a weed. And I always think it's important for folks to realize that, because while we may not, we may hate these weeds, somebody out there has an appreciation for them. And I want to say this. There's a lot of stuff on the internet about taking weeds and creating teas out of these weeds. There's a belief that if you drink these teas, these herbal teas made from some of our common weeds, that it'll actually strengthen your immune system, and it has preventative and curative properties. I'm not here to say any of that is true or not. What I do want to warn people about is that some of these weeds are toxic to humans if consumed. So I do not recommend at any time, and I will say this, if you call Howard Wallace at the Columbus County Cooperative Extension Office and you ask him, can I eat this or can I drink this if it's made into a tea, I'm going to tell you no, because we cannot, you know as well as I do, we cannot recommend things that are not scientifically research-based.
That's true. It's
all speculative at this point about a lot of that stuff, so please don't call me about any sort of weed herbal tea. I'm just not going to recommend it for you, okay? So with that being said, let's talk a little bit about some of these weeds that I have pulled up today to kind of show everybody, and we'll talk about identifying them, and then I'll talk a little more about how to control them in just a little bit. Now, I apologize. I pulled these early this morning, and they've been in the car for a little while, and it's a little warmer than I expected today. So some stuff has kind of wilted a fair amount, but some of its identification properties are still there. So I got this one, and you and I talked about this one before we came on the air. I think the flower is kind of the dead giveaway of what that is. And you know what this is,
It's
right?
a dandelion.
This is a dandelion, yes. Exactly right.
Got
Typically, whenever it is healthy and strong, that flower, that yellow flower is going to pop right up right there. And eventually, once it has become pollinated, it's actually going to turn into this, and it's going to open up, and it's got all the little seeds that your grandkids and your kids love to go and pick these in the yard and blow, and then it spreads everywhere. And then in a couple of years, you've got dandelions all over your yard. But that's a dandelion. We'll talk about how to control him in just a second. This one, I hate this one has wilted up so good because when I pulled it, it looks so pretty because this looks a lot like a very common house plant for the fall. If you look at that leaf, what does that leaf look like to you?
I'm not really sure.
You're not really sure? Let's think about our plants that we love to have around Thanksgiving and Halloween. What's that one potted plant we love to have on our front porch?
A mum.
A mum. So this is Carolina geranium. And again, I'm sorry that it's wilted down a fair amount, but if you actually look at its leaves look exactly like the leaves of a geranium.
Okay.
So that is another one of our common winter weeds. This one, it may be a little easier for you to see right there. You can tell what that is,
That's
right?
a clover bud.
This is clover. I just pulled up a little patch of clover today. Clover is pretty easy and common here in our part of the state to identify. Kids love to get out into clover patches and actually search for, of course, 4-leaf clovers, but our clovers here, our white hop and yellow hop clovers, typically just have 3 leaves to them. So that's one.
Now I know why I never could find one.
They're out there. They're out there in those 3-leaf clover patches. They sure are. Now, what about this one?
I've definitely seen it in my yard, but I have no clue what it is.
This one might be a little more difficult. This is called mouse ear chickweed. And do you know why it's called mouse ear chickweed?
Because it's about the size of a mouse ear leaf?
Well, the leaves are actually shaped a little bit like a mouse ear.
Okay.
So, and they actually put on a pretty little white flower when they actually bloom out. But this is a creeping, filling out kind of weed, so it'll fill out and make big patches, almost like clover will. And then there's this one. This one has little purple flowers on it. We see it everywhere, especially in fields now. It's growing up in a lot of our fields that are kind of fallow over the winter. This is called henbits. Once you see that pink flower and you kind of see the pattern of the leaf growth around it, it's real easy to identify. So that's henbit. Then we've got our big buddy right here. I was so happy I was able to pull this whole thing up and show off that big taproot, and it actually put out a second taproot right here.
Oh, wow.
You don't usually see this so much in yards, but it does pop up along ditch banks and along field edges. This is called curly dock. And the reason I wanted to bring this in is because curly dock is a perennial. It has this big taproot. When it gets warm or you start to mow your yard and you kind of keep this dock down where it doesn't leaf out frequently, that taproot is still alive underground. So it's going to come back every single year. You're going to see these pop up. And they can get huge, and they put on a big flower head that comes out of the very top. It's not an attractive flower, but they're just really aggressive to grow. And the problem is, I was lucky. I was able to pull this one straight out and get all that taproot out this morning. When most people pull it up, they pull from the top and they actually break it off and leave the tap. That means it's going to come back again. It's going to grow back
get
out
all of the root out
from that again. That's exactly right. So Rebecca, the next question people ask me is, well, how do I kill it? I am of the mindset that if you have a small patch of any weed in your yard, before we go chemical, let's go mechanical and let's just pull it up. Let's just try to eradicate it by natural means without having to use anything really aggressive. All that I pulled up here this morning came up out of the ground fairly easily. So it's not a strenuous task to pull some of this stuff. Even that dock, I had a little hand spade, got right up underneath it, just kind of chucked on it a little bit, and it came up right out of the ground, almost like pulling up a carrot. So I recommend everybody do that first if they're physically able to. If they're not able to, then we can actually start to get into some of our chemical control methods. One thing about all these weeds is these are what we consider our broadleaf weeds. Most of our weeds are categorized into grasses, sedges, which are things like nut sedge. You hear people talk about that, or nutgrass. It's actually a sedge.
I've heard that. Okay.
So we have grasses, sedges, and then we have our broadleaves. All of these are considered to be broadleaves. And it's pretty easy to determine what you've got in your yard based on that. If it's got a big leaf, it's broadleaf. It's considered to be broadleaf. If it looks kind of like your grass, or it looks like a grass growing, chances are it's going to be a grass type weed. If you feel along that grass along that blade, however, that you think may be grass, and you feel kind of an edge to it, that's a sedge. Sedges have edges. That's been the moniker for forever. You'll feel a distinct difference to it. It's a little more fibrous. But in controlling chemically all of these broadleaves, there are many different brands, types, and names of broadleaf herbicides that you can use that are specific to killing just broadleaves or managing broadleaves. Let me not even use the word kill. I would stay away, if this is in your yard, from any of our glyphosate mixes. Glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup, which is what most people will think about. Roundup is non-selective, so it's gonna eradicate all of this, but it's also gonna do something. It's gonna probably kill back your grass. If you're around shrubs and trees, it could damage them. We may not see that in the short term, but long term there could be some damage from that. Same thing, honestly, with our broadleaf herbicides. We don't want them to get sprayed onto our shrubs or our ornamental trees in the yard. So
I have a question, and
go right ahead.
I'm going to assume this is a weed, but those sand spurs.
Sand spurs,
What?
yes.
Oh, tell me a little bit about that. How do I?
So
My grandma always said you just dig them up, but
if you can, that's great. The thing about sand spurs, there's been a misconception that if you kill the sand spur with a herbicide, the spurs themselves go away, and that's not what happens. That's actually the seed that you're getting on your foot, or your cat or dog are bringing into the house because they've gotten into a little patch of it. So you have to treat it the first year before it starts to flower out. And that's the other thing I forgot to mention. We're getting to the point now where all these winter weeds are wanting to flower. The henbit has a flower on it. The dandelions had flowers on it. You want to try to catch these and pull them up or kill them back before we get that flower.
okay.
If you can get it before then, you don't have the little sand spurs. But if you can't and you still get it for this year, you're probably going to have to treat again for another year or maybe two to really get rid of them. And you'll start to feel them slowly going away over time. That's the other thing about these. This isn't a one-stop answer. You got to do this multiple times over several years sometimes to really get a good control about this. So I always like to tell folks to read and follow their label. Do not call me and ask me how much of it to apply, because every type is different and we need to follow what the label says because the label is law. You're also probably going to need some sort of sticking agent or surfactant to go along with it. That way when you spray it, you ensure it doesn't drift off and it actually sticks to the weed that you want it to control.
Okay.
So I want to make sure those 2 points are there too. Don't call Howard and say, how much should I put out in my yard? I don't know your yard, and at the same time, I don't know what the formulation of the chemical you're trying to apply is. Please make sure you read and follow that label that comes with it.
Got you. And can they help you at the store if you bought it from the farm store? They could probably help with application
they definitely
questions.
They definitely can. And if you bring this to me, I'll be glad to help you with it too. I just don't want, I will not make blind recommendations just based off what I've recommended to you on the phone or over the phone, because I don't have the label in front of me. And some of these formulations do differ.
Right.
So.
Well, Howard, I just want to say thank you. I've learned a lot about weeds. I've learned some different identifications, so I now know what is growing in my lawn. So again, thank you. Thank you for talking about the application processes and identification processes of these. Audience, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Spotlight North Carolina Cooperative Extension.